In May 1945, an event took place in the Austrian Alps that seems almost unbelievable. Imagine this: American soldiers and German officers fighting side by side against a common enemy. French statesmen holding rifles to defend their own lives. A world-famous tennis champion stepping into the role of a hero during a military operation. This was not the plot of a Hollywood movie, but the real story of the Battle of Castle Itter, the only engagement of World War II in which former enemies joined forces to achieve a shared goal. Castle Itter stood in the Tyrolean Alps for centuries. Originally built as a medieval fortress overlooking the mountain passes, it later evolved as times changed. In the 1870s, the old walls gave way to a grand mansion that reflected the tastes and comforts of that era. But its fate shifted dramatically after the Anschluss in March 1938, when Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany. Hoping to maintain good relations with their new rulers, Austrian authorities leased the historic castle to the Nazi hierarchy. At first, it served as a retreat for senior party officials and SS officers who came for rest, fresh alpine air, and the scenic landscape. That peaceful period ended abruptly in February 1943, when Heinrich Himmler ordered the castle to be converted into a special security prison. This was part of his broader effort to establish facilities for high-value political prisoners. In March 1943, Castle Itter officially became an extension of the Dachau concentration camp, one of the regime's oldest and most notorious institutions. SS Hauptsturmführer Sebastian Wimmer, an experienced officer who understood the significance of such a post, was appointed commandant. Gradually, prisoners began arriving, but they were not ordinary detainees. The Nazi leadership selected individuals who could serve as valuable hostages or bargaining chips in future negotiations. Most were prominent French political figures captured during the occupation of France. Among them was Albert Lebrun, the last president of the French Third Republic, who had governed during one of the country's most turbulent eras. He was joined by former Prime Ministers Édouard Daladier and Reynaud, both of whom had tried to resist German aggression and were forced to make impossible decisions during France's collapse. The French military elite was represented by Generals Maxime Weygand and Maurice Gamelin. Weygand was a celebrated hero of World War I, and Gamelin had commanded French forces at the outset of World War II. Standing out among these political and military leaders was Jean Borotra, the world-famous tennis champion and one of the legendary Four Musketeers of French tennis. His imprisonment was based less on political importance and more on symbolic value. The Nazis recognized the propaganda potential of holding such a well-known athlete. The French group was joined by prisoners from other countries. Among the Italians were senior officers and politicians who had fallen out of favor after Italy switched sides in the war. Yugoslavia was represented by Slawomir Vukovic, alias Andrei, a prominent resistance commander who had fought German occupation forces in the Balkans until his capture. Conditions at Castle Itter were nothing like those in ordinary concentration camps. The Nazi leadership understood that these individuals might be needed later for negotiations or exchanges, so they had to be kept in acceptable physical and mental condition. Each prisoner lived in a separate room with comfortable furnishings. Some were allowed to stay with their wives, and a few were even permitted visits from close friends. This relative freedom created an illusion of normalcy, though everyone knew perfectly well what their situation truly was. The prisoners had access to a substantial library maintained by the castle's former owners and supplemented by the SS administration. They could read classical literature, study philosophy, and even receive certain periodicals, though heavily censored. Physical activity was also allowed. The courtyard served as a makeshift sports ground where prisoners could exercise, play games, or simply walk in the fresh alpine air. Jean Borotra, unsurprisingly, organized improvised tennis sessions using homemade rackets and balls. Meals were unexpectedly high quality. The castle's large dining hall served food that could have come from a good restaurant of the time. Chefs prepared dishes using local alpine produce, as well as special delicacies brought in for the high-value detainees. By April 1945, however, it was clear that the Third Reich was collapsing. Soviet forces were storming Berlin, Anglo-American armies were deep inside Germany, and Hitler himself had retreated into a bunker to command divisions that no longer meaningfully existed. Panic and chaos swept through the Nazi leadership, and many functionaries sought places to hide. Castle Itter, remote and secluded in the Austrian mountains, seemed like an ideal hiding place for officials trying to escape punishment. These fleeing SS men and party members arrived armed, frightened, and increasingly unstable. Their presence drastically altered the atmosphere. Until then, the prisoners had felt relatively secure, knowing they held value as hostages. But now they began to fear for their lives. To these desperate fugitives, important prisoners were no longer assets, but obstacles or dangerous witnesses to their crimes. The crisis intensified as American forces approached the region. Commandant Wimmer and his staff, unwilling to be captured, suddenly abandoned their posts and fled, taking many of the Nazi refugees with them. The prisoners were left virtually without guards, but it was far from a moment to relax. Nearby were remnants of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, Götz von Berlichingen, a fanatical unit that continued fighting even after Germany had effectively surrendered. These men refused to accept defeat and waged their own war against anyone they viewed as traitors or enemies, including the French prisoners and even fellow Germans who dared to collaborate with the Americans. The SS remnants in the region were acting with complete fanaticism. They shot German soldiers who tried to surrender, executed civilians who displayed white flags, and terrorized the entire area. Realizing the danger posed by these zealots, the prisoners in the castle understood that they needed to take immediate action to protect themselves. They searched the rooms abandoned by the guards and gathered every weapon left behind: rifles, pistols, grenades, and any remaining ammunition. Most of them had little or no real military experience, but the instinct to survive pushed them to prepare for a possible attack. The only man among them with actual combat and guerrilla experience was Zvonimir Vukovic, the Yugoslav partisan known as Andrei. He assumed command of their improvised defense. Having fought the SS for years in the Balkans, he understood their tactics, their mentality, and what could be expected from them. His guidance was invaluable. Vukovic advised that they should immediately try to contact Allied forces and ask for help. He volunteered to go himself, relying on his reconnaissance skills and his familiarity with moving through dangerous terrain. Silently slipping out of the castle, he began a perilous journey across territory controlled by hostile SS elements. The first friendly forces he encountered were members of the Austrian resistance, who had recently liberated the nearby town of Virgo. Encouraged by the rapid advance of the Allies, these resistance fighters were actively helping to eliminate the remaining Nazi forces. After hearing Vukovic's report about the situation at the castle, the local resistance leaders brought him to their military commander. This led to one of the most unexpected encounters of the entire war. The commander turned out to be Major Joseph Sepp Gangl, a Wehrmacht officer who had defected and joined the resistance. Gangl was a classic representative of the old Prussian officer tradition, a man who placed duty, honor, and professionalism far above political ideology. He had joined the army in 1929, back in the days of the Weimar Republic, and over the years had distinguished himself as a highly capable officer. When World War II began, he was a captain of artillery. He fought in Poland and France, proving his skill and bravery. Later, on the Eastern Front, his battery repeatedly held off Soviet attacks and supported German infantry operations. His competence earned him several decorations and promotions, and eventually he was assigned to an artillery school to train young officers.
Afterward, Gangl took command of a regiment equipped with the latest Nebelwerfer rocket launchers and was transferred to the Western Front. He fought in Normandy after the Allied landings, in the Falaise Pocket, and even in the final German offensive in the Ardennes. But near the end of the war, Gangl concluded that continued resistance was pointless and would only cause more unnecessary casualties among both soldiers and civilians. When his regiment was ordered to defend the town of Virgil at all costs, he refused to carry out the command and forbade his men to fire on civilians. Eventually, his entire unit defected and joined the local resistance. After listening to Vukovic's detailed account of the situation at Castle Itter, Gangl immediately recognized how grave the danger was. He knew the reputation of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division. These were fanatics, fully capable of massacring every hostage in the castle. Understanding the urgency, the German major set off at once for Kufstein, where the leading elements of the U.S. Army were already positioned. The meeting between Gangl and the American officers was highly unusual. He appeared not as a prisoner or surrendering enemy, but as someone offering cooperation to rescue a group of important Allied nationals. The commander of the 23rd Tank Battalion, after hearing his story, immediately contacted the headquarters of the 103rd Infantry Division. Meanwhile, Vukovic himself reached Innsbruck and relayed the same information, confirming every detail. The American command quickly understood how strategically important the rescue was. Saving such high-profile French leaders would carry immense political value in the immediate post-war landscape of Europe. The mission was assigned to Lieutenant John L. Lee, an experienced officer who had been fighting since October 1944 and had already proven himself in multiple engagements in Germany. After scouting the area and studying the castle through binoculars, Lee requested substantial forces for the operation: 7 Sherman tanks and several infantry platoons, including a unit of African-American soldiers. German artillerymen under Major Gangl's command joined the effort as well. Thus, one of the most extraordinary alliances in military history took shape: Americans, African-American troops, and German soldiers uniting to protect French hostages from SS forces. The combined column set out for Castle Itter in early May 1945. At the same time, another detachment from the 103rd Infantry Division advanced from Innsbruck. The plan was that both groups would converge at the castle, secure the position, and hold it until the main Allied forces arrived. Their first encounter with the enemy happened on the move. SS fighters tried to block the mountain road, but an American Sherman quickly dispersed them with fire from its 75mm gun. The SS scattered into the woods, but it was clear they were tracking the column's progress and preparing for a more serious confrontation. As they approached the castle, Lieutenant Lee made a tactical decision. Most of the infantry and 1 tank were left in Virgil to provide rear protection and maintain communication with the main forces. Only a single platoon of American infantry, 1 Sherman tank, and all of Gangl's German soldiers continued to the castle. The meeting between the rescuers and the prisoners was mixed. On the one hand, the French dignitaries were genuinely relieved to see Allied troops and the promise of rescue. On the other hand, they were surprised, even disappointed, by the small size of the force sent to save them. They had expected an entire division. Instead, only a few dozen soldiers stood before them, and a third of them had, until recently, been their enemies.
Albert Lebrun and the other prominent French prisoners looked with understandable confusion at the German soldiers now standing beside them in full uniform. These were the same men who had once been their enemies, and now they were expected to defend them. But there was no time for long explanations. Reports soon arrived that SS troops were gathering in the nearby forests and preparing for an offensive. Lieutenant Lee immediately ordered a full defensive setup using every available person and resource. The Sherman tank was positioned at the main gate so its gun could control the castle approaches. American infantrymen occupied positions along the walls and in the towers, where they were able to establish strong firing sectors. The German soldiers, experienced artillerymen familiar with the tactics of their former comrades, took up their positions at key points around the castle. Major Gongol, drawing on his considerable combat experience, offered critical tactical insights. He understood how SS units operated and could anticipate their maneuvers. He also took charge of coordinating communication and cooperation between the Americans and the Germans, helping both sides overcome the language barrier. The French prisoners did not remain passive. Though most lacked military experience, they knew their survival depended on the outcome of the coming battle. Paul Reynaud, Edouard Daladier, and several other political leaders took up rifles and stood alongside the soldiers. John Borotra, the famed tennis champion, proved especially effective. His excellent physical conditioning and quick reflexes made him an ideal runner and observer. He moved swiftly across the castle grounds, relaying orders and reporting on enemy movements. As the day passed, the tension grew steadily. Scouts began spotting SS groups near the castle. It was obvious the enemy was assessing the defenses and preparing for a night assault. Everyone understood that the coming night would be long and dangerous. As evening fell, the SS began probing the defenses. Small reconnaissance groups fired sporadically at the castle, testing reaction times, trying to identify defensive positions, and searching for weak points. The defenders returned fire carefully, conserving ammunition and avoiding revealing their true positions. The night of May 4th to 5th, 1945, was one of the most nerve-wracking nights any of the defenders had ever experienced. SS fighters raked the castle with automatic fire throughout the night, keeping everyone on edge. From time to time, they launched small, sudden rushes towards the walls, forcing the defenders to react and draining their energy and ammunition. Lieutenant Lee established a rotating watch system to ensure that the castle was always ready to repel an attack. American and German soldiers took turns at their posts, gradually becoming accustomed to fighting together. The French prisoners, now fully involved in the defense, also stood their shifts. Edouard Daladier, once responsible for decisions affecting millions, now stood guard with a rifle in his hands. Paul Reynaud studied how hand grenades worked, preparing to use them if the SS broke through. When dawn approached, it became clear that the SS were readying a full-scale assault. Their activity increased sharply, and their fire became more precise. Everyone knew the decisive moment had arrived. At 4 o'clock in the morning on May 5, 1945, the 17th SS Division launched its major attack. Taking advantage of the darkness, SS troops crawled up to the castle perimeter unnoticed and cut through the barbed wire. The first wave raced across the open ground, heading straight for the walls. The defenders unleashed everything they had. Machine guns swept the approach routes, rifle fire picked off individual targets, and grenades detonated among the attackers. The ground around the castle turned into chaos and smoke. But the SS were prepared. They deployed smoke grenades to obscure the defenders' aim and advanced in short, coordinated bursts, covering one another's movement. Some attackers managed to reach the castle walls and began preparing for a direct assault. The situation worsened dramatically when the SS brought in heavy weapons. From the forest, an 88mm anti-tank gun opened fire. Its first rounds struck the Sherman tank at the gate. The tank took a direct hit and exploded, depriving the defenders of their most powerful weapon. The destruction of the tank emboldened the attackers. SS troops surged toward the castle in greater numbers. Some managed to throw hooked ropes onto the roof and began climbing upward. The defenders were now threatened from multiple directions at once.
In the midst of this crisis came one of the defining moments of the entire battle. Realizing they needed to find the 88mm gun's position to direct counterfire, Lieutenant Lee climbed to the roof of the castle to get a clearer view. Major Gongol went with him, relying on his experience with German heavy weapons to identify where the gun was firing from. It was a fatal decision for the German officer. As soon as they appeared on the exposed rooftop, an SS sniper hidden in the forest fired. The shot struck the German officer in the head, killing him instantly.
A man who had survived the entire war, taken part in dozens of battles, and lived through countless deadly situations, was killed in its final days while defending people he had never even met. Major Gangol's death made the situation for the defenders even more desperate. Sensing a weakening in the castle's defenses, the SS intensified their assault. They managed to seize several positions along the walls and even began infiltrating parts of the building. It looked as though the fall of the castle was only minutes away. Ammunition was running critically low. Every cartridge had to be conserved, and every shot carefully chosen. American soldiers gathered ammunition from fallen comrades, while the Germans shared whatever supplies they had left. The French prisoners helped carry boxes of cartridges and grenades wherever they were needed. Lieutenant Lee understood they could not hold on much longer. He considered withdrawing everyone deeper into the castle and forming a final defensive line inside the inner rooms. This might have bought them more time, but it would ultimately lead to their complete encirclement and annihilation. Communication with the outside world had been lost. A shell fragment had damaged their radio. No one knew whether reinforcements were coming, or if anyone even knew the castle was under attack. The defenders had no idea how long they would have to stand alone. In this critical moment, someone needed to take the initiative and try to reach the American forces. That was when Jean Baratra made his astonishing offer. The renowned tennis star volunteered to climb over the castle wall, slip through the SS lines, and reach the Allied positions to personally request reinforcements. The plan was extraordinarily dangerous. He would have to leave the besieged castle undetected, navigate through areas held by the SS, and cross the battle zone to reach the Americans. Baratra's proposal sounded almost suicidal, but there was no other option. Lieutenant Lee, after thinking through every possibility, agreed. The defenders had reached the point where either someone broke through for help or everyone in the castle would die within hours. Baratra prepared carefully for his mission. He studied enemy positions, picked the safest possible route, and waited until the SS launched another attack that temporarily drew their attention away from his chosen escape point. Taking advantage of that moment, he climbed over the wall and slipped into the forest, unnoticed. The journey was filled with danger. Baratra had to crawl through underbrush, avoid enemy patrols, and detour around SS firing positions. Several times he came within meters of SS soldiers, but each time he managed to stay hidden. While he made his perilous trek, the defenders inside the castle continued resisting wave after wave of attacks. The situation was becoming disastrous. Ammunition was nearly gone, and the SS were preparing for yet another assault, one that would likely break through. Every passing minute pushed the defenders closer to catastrophe. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the horizon suddenly filled with clouds of dust. A column of American armored vehicles was approaching the castle. Baratra had succeeded in his nearly impossible mission. Not only had he survived the journey, but he had also managed to convince the American commanders of the urgency of the situation and the need for immediate action. A force of Sherman tanks and infantry was now advancing rapidly toward Castle Itter. The American officers, once informed, understood the political and humanitarian importance of rescuing such high-ranking prisoners. They dispatched enough tanks and infantry to ensure the defeat of the SS forces. These reinforcements included both fresh armored units
and battle-hardened infantry. Their arrival changed the course of the battle instantly. The SS fighters who had been preparing for their final assault suddenly found themselves trapped between the castle defenders and the advancing American column. They were now under attack from two directions. American tanks opened fire immediately, targeting the SS positions in the forests. The Sherman's 75mm guns systematically destroyed enemy firing points, silenced their remaining artillery, and smashed their improvised shelters. Supported by the tanks, the infantry launched a broad assault across the front. The SS tried to fight back, but their position was hopeless. Surrounded, outgunned, and unable to maneuver, they began surrendering in large numbers. Only a few diehards attempted to break out of the encirclement, and most of those were killed or captured. The battle for Castle Inter was over. The 17th SS Division's detachment was crushed. Most of its men were killed or taken prisoner. The threat of a mass execution of the French hostages was completely eliminated, and the castle finally fell under full American control. The freed French leaders expressed deep gratitude to everyone involved in the operation. They highlighted the courage of the American soldiers, the self-sacrifice of the German defectors who chose to fight beside them, and the remarkable bravery of Jean Baratra, whose daring mission had saved all of their lives.